Cheers, everybody. This is Eric from GameShampoo.com. It is the week after E3, just closing up that week, and had some time to decompress on everything that's happened at E3 and all the previews I wrote and all the games that I saw and all the theater presentations and PR people. And it's about time to do a wrap-up. We already have some kind of like best of awards up for like graphics and genre stuff, but just on a bigger scale, just kind of talking about and breaking down some of the bigger games that were there, some of the bigger consoles that were there, what Microsoft has going on, Sony, Nintendo, and really kind of just shining a spotlight on some of that bigger stuff, because there are so many questions going into the end of the year. So I'm going to be doing a couple videos kind of relating to that stuff. Like I just said, I'll do a video for each of the major consoles and everything that's going on with them, and maybe some smaller ones relating to bigger third-party exclusives like Watch Dogs and Battlefield 4 and Call of Duty, maybe, or whatever. I don't know, we'll see. See if I have the time for it. And let's start off with, let's go with the PlayStation. That was the first thing I saw at E3, or the first thing that I saw on the show floor anyway. And so I guess that'll be the first thing that I'll talk about on here. The very first game that I played on the PlayStation 4 was DriveClub, and I was actually one of the first to get into that booth. They had this kind of booth set up way back in the corner of the Sony booth, like right next to all the indie stuff, and they had these like nice leather chairs, kind of like this but nicer, and like a little dashboard kind of thing next to the chair with the PS4 controller. And that was the first time both that I had seen a PS4 controller in person, because I hadn't gone to the New York event earlier this year, and obviously the first time that I was able to touch one, the former being said. So that was really exciting for me, and it was really I was really curious to see how they would kind of shape up certain things about the PS3 controller that maybe weren't so great, like the triggers being really mushy, like these big fat marshmallowy kind of things, and the analog sticks and how you push them together and your thumbs kind of hit each other. Because I play a lot of games on the PS3, especially there's kind of a period where my Xbox 360 had broken so many times that I just refused to get it fixed and just played everything on PS3 for a while. And or I refused to use the Xbox, at least, send it in for free to get it repaired. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time with that controller, and I like it a lot, but it has a lot of flaws, and it seems like Sony knows that, and it seems like they really did source a lot of developer feedback when they wanted to make this thing. I know that's been a big thing they've been trumpeting around, like, oh, we asked Ubisoft and we asked like Bungie and whoever what they wanted to see with this controller, and this is what they all came up with. And you can really feel that when you put it in your hands. It has a slightly deeper back, so when you're holding a PS3 controller normally, well, let me just go get one. So DualShock 3 right here. We'll have the comparison video of 3 versus 4 when the PS4 comes out. But for now, this should do. Anybody who spent any time with this thing knows about its kind of iffy L2 and R2 triggers. Just very, not quite as loose as the Xbox 360's triggers, and practically nobody uses these things for shooting in games anymore. They've all kind of wised up because it just doesn't really work for that. I do think it feels pretty nice for racing in a racing game, but that's kind of a small use case. And then you've got the front analog sticks, which when you push them both in together like that, thumbs on them, and then your thumbs are touching. And Both of those things are fixed with the PS4 controller. The analog sticks are spaced out a little bit farther apart, and they're also a lot less loose. You know, you can see it's kind of, they're jiggling around. And it's something I actually like about the PS3 controller is that they're super loose, and you can kind of play it fast and loose, or you can give it a little bit more subtlety if that's what you want, but they are much tighter on the PS4's controller and much easier to keep your thumbs on because they each have like a little ring around the outside of the controller, whereas this one obviously has nothing. And the triggers, yeah, the triggers are much more similar to the Xbox 360s, and that's really all that needs to be said. They're not these big square things anymore. They are, you know, maybe 2/3 the width of these, and they are longer, so they'll extend out to about, you know, maybe down here is a good, like, guesstimate on my part. And obviously the top part of the controller for the DualShock 4, much different. There are no start and select buttons on there. For one thing, there's the big touchpad, and then there's a share button on one side, and I forget what they're calling the other button, but you know, like a select button equivalent, or maybe it's just called select, I don't completely remember, on the other side. And that's the new kind of top of the controller. And you'd think that would make the controller a lot bigger and a lot bulkier, because you've got this, you know, decently sized square pad on there alongside the two normal buttons. But really, I didn't notice it at all in my multiple demos of PS4 games. It felt super comfortable, super responsive, super well thought out, really, and you can really feel how much they sourced developer feedback in every aspect of the controller, from the analog sticks, which are, you know, tight and really responsive and comfortable to keep your thumbs on, and they're spaced farther apart, to the triggers, which just have that right amount of play to them. And like I started off saying, I never actually finished saying, the back feels like it's just slightly deeper, so that you can kind of get your hands around it just a little bit better than you can with the DualShock 3. And when you're actually pushing on the touchpad, which I had to do during my Killzone Shadowfall demo, it's a little bit like using a BlackBerry touch screen, or at least like that was a couple years ago. I haven't actually touched a BlackBerry phone in a long time, but it has this kind of analog touchpad where you touch it and then you actually click down on the pad a little bit with your finger. There's a very palpable kind of clicking when you push down on the touchpad. But otherwise, you know, it feels familiar enough to somebody who's used a PS3 controller a whole bunch to feel like home, you know. But it's different enough to be really exciting and really intriguing, and I'm not totally sold on the touchpad thing yet, just because I don't really know if people are going to make good use of that, or what kind of use you can really put that to in a game. I suspect we might see some indie titles doing some pretty interesting things with that. But otherwise, yeah, it feels completely solid, and probably the best controller I put my hands on at E3 without naming any names or shouting out to anybody else. I mean, Xbox One's controller seems pretty good too. Like, I'm definitely excited to play more of the Xbox One when that comes out. But that is for a different video. So let's get to the games and just kind of go through the exclusives really quickly, or the ones that I saw. I did not see Knack. I saw a very brief presentation after E3, which was kind of just part of this Sony online thing. Like, you can find it on YouTube, and you can probably find it on the PlayStation blog, where he's going through this ice level, and you're like smacking up these ice crystals, and then Knack like actually absorbs the ice into his body, and now he becomes ice. And he has, like, you know, he can like freeze guys by hitting them or whatever. but I didn't get to actually play it, and there were definitely hands-on stations available at the show. It's just something I didn't have the time for. Seems cool, seems more interesting than I expected it to. I can see them doing some kind of cool things with, excuse me, with the ability to absorb elemental, powers and stuff inside of Knack. There was another demo where he jumped up onto this castle, it looked like, and he was made out of wood, and he had applied fire to himself, so he's like this giant, giant form. At that time he can shrink as well. He's just this giant, like, wooden golem thing on fire, and he freaks all these guards out and then just kind of like laughs it off in the end. So that looks pretty cool. I wasn't really expecting anything out of it, so maybe that's kind of maybe I'm just kind of having a positive reaction to it because I didn't really expect anything out of it. And like I said, I didn't really play it, but I did manage to play Killzone and DriveClub and a few indie games as well, so let's delve into those. Killzone, probably the biggest, at least in terms of fan base, and they're doing some really, I wouldn't necessarily say risky things with it, but different things for sure. Mainly in opening up the levels and kind of giving the player a choice as to what order do I want to get these objectives in. Do I want to go like here, 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 or in the case of my demo, there's 3 charges that you need to plant, 3 little kind of things that you need to blow up. So I kind of started out going towards one and like screwed that one up almost immediately. I ran over here and did this one, and then cycled around to the farthest, and then came back around to that first one after things had kind of cooled down a little bit, and then took that objective and then went across to my final objective. And that kind of sandbox flexibility really called to mind the Crysis games, which is a comparison that a lot of people have made, but it's totally a valid one, I think. It's a really good looking shooter, and it kind of gives you this unlimited sandbox to play around in, but minus the ability to turn invisible, which keeps things, at least in my demo, kept things high stakes for the stealth, which is another more or less new addition to Killzone. There was that little sneaking thing, like basically a set piece event in the forest in Killzone 3, but I would hardly call that stealth. This is like proper stealth gameplay. So, you got your little knife. As usual, you've got the brutal melee things. I think they introduced those in Killzone 3, and then they've carried that stuff over into Mercenary, and it looks like Shadowfall as well. So, you go up and like stick a guy and break his neck, or I don't know if that eye stabbing one is still in there, but that was pretty messed up. And you can take guys out silently from behind if you manage to get behind them, or from above if you manage to get above them. And if you're careful enough, which the game definitely provides you the tools to be, which I will get to in a second, then you can actually get through this demo without alerting, I don't know about anybody, but at least too many people. I definitely wanted to get a feel for the shooting as well as the sneaking, so although I totally botched that first objective and got into the combat way faster than I intended to. But the game gives you a lot of tools to explore the area and kind of feel things out a little bit and say, like, okay, like here's the situation and how do I want to approach that, which is a really refreshing change of pace from the usual roller coaster pacing of calling it Crysis, of Killzone, which looks like it's still there too. That demo at the February thing was just this crazy fast paced, like just keep moving kind of roller coaster experience where you're jumping onto a helicopter and like shooting guys on the ground with your pistol, and then the helicopter like tosses you off, you shoot it down or something, ridiculous and crazy like that. It looks like that stuff is still going to be there for people who like it, but just in a more open context, which is really cool. So you get this little bot that's called the Owl, Not really sure what that's an acronym for, or if it's an acronym for anything, but I assume it is. And this guy is basically like your best friend in Killzone Shadowfall. He flies around over you, doesn't really engage in the combat too much unless you tell him to. You can point at a group of soldiers or just soldier or whatever, and click down on the touchpad in a certain direction and basically say like, hey, go kill that dude for me, and he'll go and fight for you. But he can also do a whole bunch of other things that are good for navigation, stealth, all these different types of gameplay that you might want to explore. He's got a zip line, so you can basically freeform zip line, like over here, over there, whatever, which was really neat during the demo because we were in these cliff sides and in these, kind of really lush forests that we haven't seen in a Killzone game before, and suddenly you've got this ability to zip line to like a cliffside up there and then zip line over to this enemy base down there. And if you zip line over an enemy and then you drop down, you can just like knife him really good, and that's really satisfying, and it's a really cool way to open up the environment. He can also pop up like a little shield in front of you, and you can shoot through it, but the enemies cannot. But they are, as I found out, very intelligent, and they will actually, try to find a way around your shield. If you put a shield up, they'll like run above you or flank you or whatever. So that's not necessarily like a get out of jail free card. And then finally, he can shock a group of enemies, which will stun them temporarily. And you can actually go into slow motion, kind of like a bullet time thing, and take dudes out, which is a really good combination with the shock. Like, just shock a big group of guys, slow motion, and then just like bam, 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 they're all dead. Finally, not sure if it's an owl ability or not, or if it's just something that's like in your suit or whatever. That wasn't quite clear to me, but you can ping the environment around you. It just kind of sends out this little like ping sonar kind of deal, and it goes out in this radius around you, and if you hold it down long enough, it'll highlight enemies through walls, so you can really kind of get a feel for where the enemies are when you're trying to sneak around them, or if you're trying to plan your attack or whatever. It seemed really, really helpful. That was probably the power I used the most. That and the zip line, at least. So that's Killzone Shadowfall. It seems like a change of pace for the series, and it definitely seems more interesting because of that. I'm not personally super interested in FPS games at the moment unless they do something like totally wildly different, like Bioshock Infinite did, with its setting and its story and its themes and all that. But I still like FPS titles. They're still one of my favorite genres. It's just that I've been playing so many of them with all these FPS games that have come out over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's not a knock against Killzone. I think Shadowfall will probably be one of the better FPS titles at the end of this year, just based on that really short demo. I mean, obviously that's just a vertical slice of gameplay, and that's not me saying like, oh, this game is amazing. That's not an endorsement, but it's on track to be really among those kind of games to be really interesting, but it's not going to blow anybody's mind, I don't think, like Bioshock might have. But what they're doing with Killzone is really cool. I have to admire them taking the gameplay on a core level and just shaking it up a little bit, adding some variety, adding a little bit of openness, because that is something I really like in games, is the ability to attack a situation any way you want. That's what made Far Cry 3 awesome, so we'll see how it goes. Right now, I know a couple things for sure. It controls well, it feels great on the PS4 controller, and it looks freaking amazing. Like the lighting in that game, the foliage, and kind of like the ambient way that it rustles in the breeze is just absolutely incredible looking. So at the very least, it's definitely going to be, pretty competent and pretty incredible looking. Other game I played was DriveClub, other major game anyway. And DriveClub left me with an even more positive impression than Killzone did. not necessarily in the looks department, where it kind of sort of looked like a PS3 game. I don't want to necessarily put that label on it right now because, again, I played one race in this game. It's not a whole lot. But from what I played, it looked fine. It didn't necessarily look like, this is super next gen, is like, blah, blowing my mind, whatever. But it played pretty well. It's definitely more of an arcade racer than a sim. It definitely hews pretty close to Evolution's MotorStorm kind of lineage. Although, thankfully, the cars in this game are not like impossible to turn like the majority of the vehicles in the MotorStorm games were. Control's pretty arcadey. I would compare it to something maybe along the lines of Grid, or a bit faster and more intense version of PGR maybe, although it's been a while since I played that. I think Grid 2 is a pretty good reference point for that style of gameplay. But what really got me super excited for this game is all the social stuff that's built into it at a core level. Like, this game could not exist without the social stuff. And basically what happened when I went down to sit in their fancy little DriveClub chair was that they had this PlayStation Eye up here, and they're like, look up at the camera and it's going to take a picture of you. So, look up and make a stupid face, and it takes a picture of you. And then you're in the car select screen, and they had two cars at the demo. There's an Audi, and there was, I want to say a Bugatti of some sort. I don't remember which kind exactly. It's all early E3, it's all a little bit of a blur, but you get behind the wheel of one of these two cars. The Audi was the more manageable of the two. Bugatti much more like sporty and kind of in that class of going so fast you can barely control it. And you go and race through this challenge that they've set for you. And along the way in these tracks, there are smaller challenges built within the framework of this larger challenge. So you might hit a section of track and it goes, okay, drift around these corners and do the absolute best drift you can. And then we're going to compare you to everybody else who's done this section of the track at E3 so far. And in the final game, that would obviously be everyone who's driven it online ever. So you drift around the corners, and when you get to the end of that little section of track, it takes all the points you got from drifting, excuse me, and it puts this little image at the bottom of the person who has the best score, like the picture they took with the PlayStation Eye. And if you beat them out, your picture goes and replaces them. And if you don't beat them out, it lets you know, like, hey, they won. They got more points here than you did, and their picture remains at the bottom. So you're going through this track, doing all these micro challenges along the way, and it's comparing you the whole time to everyone who's ever played this challenge before. And it's showing you, not only their scores and their times and what have you, but it's showing you pictures of them as well, which is only something that'll happen if you use the PlayStation Eye, I should know. And I think that image thing really added a lot to the experience. I fully expect to see people's penises on the screen. I don't know if they're going to have mods or filters for that or something. But seeing that image on the screen and going this is the person I'm trying to beat right now really helped the experience along, I think, and helped it, it gave it this really social kind of fun jockeying for position with friends sort of feel that you might get when you're playing a racing game on the couch with somebody. And that's not a feeling that I've had in an online game, at all really, unless I'm playing online with people I'm already very good friends with. So what they're doing basically is they're integrating the coolest stuff about social media into this game at its very core. And in the final version, you're going to be able to form clubs with these people, make your own challenges, send them out to everybody in the world, and drive your club against this other club, race people individually. It's just a game that is chock full of social options and online options, and I can see it getting really addictive. I can see some people getting really into it and trying to push their club to the forefront of the online leaderboards and everything else. So it's really, really exciting. And the fact that it controls, or seemed to control pretty well. Again, I played probably like a 3 to 5 minute demo of this, so this is all based on that amount of time, just for reference. But the demo that I played of it, it controlled really well. Looked nice enough. The social stuff, again, was the crux of this entire experience, and that's what has me excited about it. It's not just another driving game, from what I can see. It's making an attempt to form a community, and that's really cool. What else did I play? I played Outlast, and that's, I suppose, the last like big PS3 game I played. And that's not even that big of a game, really, but it's a horror game, and man, it's flippin' scary. PC and PS4 exclusive at the moment, at least. It is one of those games that Sony made a real effort to go out and grab indie developers and bring them into the system and like let them mess around with it and let them bring their games to it. Transistor is coming to PS4. I did play that. I played it at PAX East, and you can see pretty much everything I can have to tell you about it by watching the E3 stage demo that Greg Kasavin and Amir, blanking on his last name, but cool guys. But the stage demo that Greg and Amir gave at the PlayStation booth during E3, you can see pretty much everything I have to tell you about, like freezing time, and it all plays exactly like it looks. Good, like promising looking game for sure. But they had like that and Outlast and Mercenary Kings from the dudes who made Wizorb was there and looking really nice. A couple of other games that I didn't get a chance to play, unfortunately, but which look really interesting. But Outlast is a 3D horror game. You're in first person, and you see everything through the lens of like a little camera, like a sort of, you're carrying around a GoPro or something like that. And you're a reporter. You're going to this insane asylum to research some kind of story, and when you can't get in through the front door, you decide, like any sane person, to go climb up this scaffolding and jump in through a window and like go investigate this clearly off limits insane asylum. It's only natural, right? Who wouldn't? So I did have a bit of an issue where I had to restart the demo. There's a part where they teach you how to jump, and there's like this little gap in between the scaffolding, and so you have to jump over the gap, and me, being an idiot, I jumped and didn't make it to the other side and fell down under the scaffolding and ended up in this spot, like weird spot where the scaffolding was arranged just so that I couldn't get out from under it, so I had to restart the demo. So that kind of started things off, and I was like, I don't know. But quickly picked up from there. I'm, again, really, really excited for this game. PS4 and PC, again, so it's not strictly exclusive to PS4 if you do have a PC good enough to run it. It's a pretty nice looking game. These are ex-Ubisoft guys, and they definitely bring their A game here in terms of the visuals. What was I even talking about? I just went off on a complete tangent. Right, so you're a reporter and you go into this weird, creepy asylum and quickly discover that not everything is as it seems, or, maybe better phrasing of that is everything is as it seems, because it's a creepy freaking asylum, and why are you in here in the first place? But you go in and this, go through a door, and there's a body in the ceiling, and it just like falls down the sky out of the sky with this big crushing, splatting sound. And that was the moment when Outlast made me like physically like recoil, like fetal position, and then like in front of like a couple of people, the developers who I heard laughing behind me, and a bunch of other people. But I wasn't alone. Saw some other game journalists kind of like give a little yelp at that part and stuff too. And not to spoil the scares of it, I do have a preview up on the site, gameshampoo.com/magazine, of Outlast, as well as of everything else I'm going to be discussing here and in all these other videos. But there's a preview up there that goes into more depth about that kind of stuff. But there's an invincible enemy that stalks you around later on that leads to a pretty good jump scare if you don't see it coming. I had seen a trailer, so I had unfortunately had that part spoiled for me. But it ends with this sequence where he's chasing around these darkened corridors in this kind of weird cellar area, and that gave me that kind of feeling of like, I don't know, again, because it was kind of tough to find your way out of there, and didn't really do a lot to kind of point you in a direction or another, just running into a lot of dead ends. I ran into a dead end, and the battery in my camcorder ran out, and so when your battery runs out, you can't use night vision. When you can't use night vision, you see blackness everywhere. So I ended up running into this dead end, and then turning around, and there's this guy's like face in my screen, and he's just like wailing on me, and there wasn't really anything I could do at that point. But it was a little frustrating, but at the same time, it seems like a really, really promising horror game. It seems a lot scarier than anything I've played since Amnesia, which is really promising. So that's everything I played for the PlayStation 4. I also saw InFamous Second Son, and I saw some third-party stuff being played, Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed and the like. Really quickly, I will give my InFamous impressions, but they didn't show any of the open world, which is largely what's interesting about the InFamous series, right? And they also didn't show any of the morality, good, evil, superhero, supervillain kind of stuff, which is basically the rest of what is interesting about that series, right? I mean, basically what they showed was just this quick siege mission, and you go into this enemy base, and there's like a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton out there for some reason. I guess you're maybe at a museum that they converted into a base, and use the typical powers of like gliding around instead of sliding up electric poles. Now you turn into steam and you go into a vent, and then you fly out the top of the vent, but it's basically the same effect. And and you've got your little like aim your hand and shoot fire smog stuff at people. So even though the power set is different, it's really kind of the same at the moment. The real potential there is in the protagonist's ability to absorb other conduits' powers, which was not something Cole could do. So this new guy, Delson, he can ideally grow in a lot of really interesting ways, and that will hopefully play into the morality stuff in some really cool ways. Like, maybe if you kill this guy, you get his powers, but otherwise maybe you spare him and you make do with something else. We'll have to see how all that goes. But the end of the demo ended up with him flying up in the air and coming back down for this big shockwave super move kind of thing that blew up the dinosaur skeleton and killed pretty much everybody in there. It looks like more InFamous, and that's not really like a bad thing. InFamous 2 was easily one of my favorite games of 2011, and this looks promising. But again, I haven't seen the open world or the morality stuff, so those are the two things that are most interesting probably about InFamous to me. So we'll have to wait and see. It was a good introduction. It was a good primer to next gen InFamous. It looks really, really nice. They have some great weather effects and stuff like that going on. And Sucker Punch is based out of Seattle. The game takes place in Seattle, so there's some local passion going on there for sure. So that's everything I saw on the PS4, condensed down into a nutshell. I have really detailed impressions of all this stuff up on gameshampoo.com/magazine again, so check that out. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for an Xbox One recap, including all the crazy DRM reversal junk that happened earlier this week, and how that's impacting the sales. And I'm going to do Wii U stuff as well, so stay tuned for that, and like and subscribe for more.